actually my speech is not so much about Fleep, but how we are building the Fleep, and I think this is quite more relevant to you than just the sales pitch about what Fleep is and does and why should you use it. So I'd rather use my, I would say, Fleep building experience and trying to share that with you from my perspective, what we've learned. But just to get started, unfortunately this is my very first day here on this conference, so I'm not sure I understand what is the audience. So let's do a quick kind of exercise. So let's raise hands, people who in their work, in their daily work, actually create code or write code. Who are those people? Okay, seems like majority. Okay, let's raise the hands who do not create any code in their daily work. Okay, so can I kind of say that you guys are more or less product owners, product managers, team managers, scrum managers, I don't know, stuff like that. Okay, so basically most of you are developers. Then I'm not sure how relevant this is to you directly, because I'm not creating any code in Fleep. So maybe I'm speaking from your perspective from different angle. But anyhow, my background is that before Fleep I did some work at Skype. Before Skype I did some work at telecoms. In terms of Agile and Scrum, by training I'm a product owner, not a Scrum Master or the Scrum team member. And I think most of what I will be speaking today is from the product owner's perspective, but I have few thoughts on how Scrum teams work and which works for us in Fleep and which doesn't. So I would start with Agile Manifesto, because I think first of all, if you use whatever methodology you want to use in your team or building a product, it really boils down to you should use whatever methodology works for you. So definitely there are great companies, great products built by waterfall, great products built by some other methodologies, but I think the reason why Agile as a philosophy works for Fleep quite well is really when I reread this manifesto yesterday. So I think the emphasis on really the people, not on the processes and tools, is very relevant, because as soon as any process involves people and humans, you have to focus on them rather than predictable processes or I would say very strict processes, because they really don't work on people. People get sick, they have hangovers, they had bad hair days, etc. So it's quite relevant, at least in my experience, not only in Fleep but previously as well. The second thing, working software over comprehensive documentation. Well, I don't know too much about that, because I can't say how well documented Fleep code, for example, right now is, because I really never looked at it. But to some extent I believe into it. So I think even better is what I think Paul Leys said once, is that document what you do what you document. I think they should go hand in hand. It's kind of like, I don't know, it should be kind of baseline. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. If I understand that right, I think this tries to say that instead of tricking each other, trying to find a way how to make bugs look like a features and features look like a bugs. Maybe this is that. Maybe this is more related to the people who are developing for really a customer, while in our case the customer is the product owner, and product owner kind of represents the customer. So there is no really a contract negotiation in place in that sense. And the last one is very relevant to Fleep, is that I will cover that in the next slides a bit more, but I think really to build something you have to have a long-term vision what you want to achieve, but while moving towards that direction, the only way to reach that is constantly being able to respond to new information, to the changes on the market, to the feedback from the users, I think this is very relevant, at least to us. Probably there are software projects, products, services where things are very predefined and clear what needs to be done. I think in our case we only have this long-term vision, what we want to achieve. We want to replace email in the workplace. We want to become a word, a meaningful word. To Fleep should mean and being understand within business as currently it is to Skype or send me an email. Everybody understand what those two things mean. We want to make Fleep similar. So my next slides are basically split in a way just for you to basically understand or get some understanding what I will cover. I will have a slide which is already in there, how we split the long-term vision into actionable plan. Then I'll speak quickly about cycles we have. Then I will speak about team and things which are still ongoing, and I'm not sure where we end up with those. So basically things which we have already done during the 2 years of building Fleep, and things we don't really know yet how we will solve them or what will be the outcome. By the way, the one thing that I really like in Agile is this Kaizen approach. I don't know how much you have spoken already about Agile during the last 2 days here, but I think the very philosophy of Kaizen to me is that you as a manager or you as a developer, you shouldn't focus too much on specific events. Someone showing up being drunk into workplace, someone creating a bug, someone not finishing what he committed to. I think they are specific events. What you should focus to is a patterns. Someone constantly doing something differently than expected. Whether a person or a team or a process, if there is a pattern that something is constantly different than you would like to have it, then you should try to fix it. And that's how I understand Kaizen. Kaizen is not reacting to every single specific event, because stuff happens all the time and you just spend then most of the time reacting. So first slide, how we got from that long-term vision to replace email in the workplace into something which we actually could start to write code against too. So what we did as a team, as a co-founders, when we came together, was first thing we agreed what we wanna achieve in long term, and in context of ours, the long term was 5 to 7 years. What we think is achievable in that time frame, and whether this is significant and big enough for us to actually attach our lives, time and money into it. Once this was done, the essential and very important thing for us was, before we started doing anything, we scoped it to the minimum viable product, so to say. At least we call it minimum viable product. I think this is not what Eric Reyes thinks as a minimum viable product, because he thinks there should be market validation attached to it as well. But basically it was a first phase, or the first thing we went to build. Once this was agreed, we just focused on building this very minimum thing. And why we didn't care about long-term vision too much, and in that phase was which came after that was launch. Because only once you have something which you can show to the user, you get the first validation. Until then, you just have assumptions whether something is important or not. Of course, we did some user interviews, but they weren't too useful comparing to what was the feedback from the market once we got ourselves launched. And just to get you a time frame, we started coding Fleep pretty much in the December of 2012, and we launched it to the first public. So basically everyone were able to sign in and use it in the August. So it took us 8 months to build this MVP. Once it was launched, from that onwards, I think it's quite iterative approach towards the vision. So first of all, we learn constantly what users are telling to us, and we evaluate whether this is something we have to bake into our plans quickly, react quickly, or this is something that we have already thought about and we want to do one day, but we can clearly postpone it. And the second thing is we are constantly in parallel making bets to things that users are not asking from us yet. So this is this famous thing which Steve Jobs once said, that people don't know what they want. I think good of example of that is those who are already Fleep users probably know what I'm talking about, but we have in Fleep something we call seen by indicators. It's a small arrow in the conversation flow which shows you who have read which messages. So basically, if I open any Fleep conversation, I see up till how far Marek has read all the conversation, up till how far Renno has read all the messages in that conversation. And this provides me a much better insight into who are actually participating versus the classical online away and do not disturb indicators which you are used in any chat services. So this was clearly a bet towards something that users didn't actually ask for, but we thought this will be a super useful and super important, and once we launched it, this has proven to be so. The second thing is cycles. So what cycles do we have in Fleep, and why we think they matter. So I think, first of all, the whole nature works in cycles. Whether this is a year, a day, whether this is our heart, or digestion system, everything works in cycles, right? So same, this is very human to us, and we want to have some clear start, action, and then we want to feel that we have across the finish line. We don't want to be constantly running, especially in the case when we don't know how long we have to run. Thus, I think cycles work very well psychologically for the team, and kind of set the clear context to the plans. What we have since the very beginning of Fleep is quarterly planning. We do every quarter a plan for the next 3 months, but the very crucial thing with quarterly planning, and I think it falls back to the weekly planning and daily scrums and all that as well, is that you don't start with the new plan what you want to do in the next cycle, but you start with a review of the previous cycle you just finished. Because this gives you a retro perspective, whether you were too optimistic, whether you were too pessimistic to your planning, and most of all, it gives everyone a alignment where we currently are. So everybody can clearly see that although we thought that within 1 hour we are able to drive from Tallinn to Mäo, we are actually still in Kose. And this is super important when you are working as a team, because people differently have different perspectives, whether we are in Kose or in Mäo or already in Põltsamaa. So this review is the crucial thing to start with any planning activities. Once you have done that, of course, all the things that you wanted to do in previous cycle, you should consider as the highest priority for the next cycle. And that's what we do with quarterly planning. When we had a plan to achieve something in Q4, all the things which we don't finish in Q4 are the first candidates to the Q1 planning. So we start with review, and then we continue with setting plans for the next 3 months. What we do sometimes is we change our plans during the quarter, but we try to do it as little as possible, and just to avoid the confusion within the team, because people kind of have the 3 months vision what they achieve, and if they think about features which we are introducing, they kind of in their head they plan them into some order and into some releases. So all the changes there are already affecting our speed, I would say. The weekly planning is the next cycle, so we don't have anything between quarterly planning and weekly planning. The next thing is that every Monday, once a week, we do a review what we achieved last week and what we want to do in the next week. And as a whole team event, this looks only at the level of the quarterly planning items. So the meta backlog is what we call it. So we don't look into a specific development tasks, but we are looking whether currently, for example, Picture Previewer is launching, partial already launched. So this is a one meta backlog item which the specific Scrum team then reports up what is the latest status on it. And daily Scrum is something which we have lately to some extent introduced, but I think I have a bullet about it in work in progress as well. Yep. So I won't cover it too much right now. I would say this is something which we are still in the phase of learning how it works for us. And of course, the fourth thing is that the Fleep conversations, which are constantly ongoing about the ongoing developments, about the future developments, it's kind of the constantly ongoing meeting room, I would say, or meeting rooms. We're splitting Fleep conversations by different features or thoughts, and there are some problems around it as well. For example, one thing that I found with the scene by notificators is that whether I have an idea about the future feature which we might do someday, and I have some idea how we could potentially build it, then what I usually do, I write this idea down into a specific Fleep conversation. But what annoys me to some extent is that whenever I post it, I immediately see that most or half of the team immediately reads it, which is actually a context switch to them from what they should be doing right now. So thus, I think the messaging and Fleep to some extent are great tools, but you have to think through how to maintain your focus on the task, what you should be accomplishing during your current day or hour. Then few things about team and how we are organizing as a team. So we are currently 14 people. I think 4 of us are not creating code in the team. So and one of those 4 is designers. So we have 3 people, including myself. 2 on marketing, myself, designer, and then 10 people who are creating code. How we have organized ourselves currently is that a designer, a marketeers, and myself are not in any scrums. And then we have 2 developers who are also not attached to any scrums specifically. One is Marco, doing pretty much all the infrastructure and all the back-end long-term developments. So he's not attached to any specific feature development. And the second is Kersti, who does all the statistics, I would say all the statistics and statistics related activities, so not really related to feature development directly. So, which leaves us with 8 people. We started, of course, with a bit smaller team, but anyhow, until this October, we worked as a one big scrum, so there wasn't any scrum teams, and the weekly planning was basically the only point of alignment around features, and all those 8 developers who were actually developing for features were pretty individual throughout the week. What we did in October was that we understood that this is kind of great, but the situation we were constantly finding ourselves was that we were with the feature development all over the place. So if we started with a quarter with 20 items we want to develop, or 20 features so to say, in a quarter, then 2 weeks into the quarter we already saw that ongoing development is happening on 15 out of those 20. And this stayed pretty much the situation until the end of the quarter. So the focus on a one or few meta backlogs items wasn't happening, but instead pretty much all developers spread it across all the very many features, which ended up for the releasing perspective, from the communicating to the user's perspective, a relatively big task to get all the ducks aligned and to be able to blog about a feature or to be able to release a feature in press. Because we had something already done in iPhone, something not even started, the same thing not even started in web or Android. So thus what we did in October, we split our 8 people into 2 teams. The way they are currently organized is that one Scrum team is fully cross-functional, including mobiles. So Eric and Oliver, who are doing mobile development, they are in that team B, we call it. And team A is backend and web only, because I would say not half, but at least a third of our backlog items are in the user interface perspective only happening in the browser client. What I can say already based on that month and a half we have done that is that great things are happening. First of all, we have narrowed our focus to fewer items in work at any point of time, from this 15 I previously said to the situation where currently Team A has 3 items in work in progress and Team B has 2 items in work in progress. So we have 5 items which are being developed, and in terms of individual developer, he has only 3 or 2 items he has to focus to. And a crucial thing about the team split, if you do, or at least what we found, is actually ability to release independently as a team. So you shouldn't have dependency outside of your team, or you should at least have as little dependencies outside of your team if you can. We still have dependencies. Biggest ones are iPhone App Store releases. We sometimes, I think when iOS... what's the latest iOS? iOS 8? Anyhow, the latest iOS release, iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 release created a situation where App Store was reviewing your new submits for 2 weeks. And this delayed our feature rollouts because we had to wait until we get the new iPhone out there, iPhone app out there. Users can upgrade to it, and then we can again make new changes into the API, for example. So there are dependencies, but as independent they could be, this seems to be a great path towards to work to. So things which are still work in progress, and I hope we can fix them, but I think it's still something which needs to be worked and tuned for. First of all, team accountability. When we had a situation, as I described, where every single developer was planning his own week and then throughout the week just focusing, getting in his code this specific feature done, then when we changed that in the October, this was totally a new situation for most of the team. They weren't used to waiting for others to follow. They were not used to think how this what we want to accomplish in that week as a team, how I can contribute into this. And quite often this is not about me creating a new lines of code in my code path, but instead I should go and test someone else's code, or maybe I should go and think how we actually can release that. So maybe and quite often those activities I as a Scrum team member are not actually related to coding, but instead thinking as what we as a team can accomplish there. So the metaphor I've been thinking about Scrum and the working as a Scrum team is that probably you are all to some extent familiar to hiking in the mountains, especially in the upper parts of it. What people do there, they attach the whole team into the one rope, and this rope has a specific length. Of course, there is some flexibility. So they basically, the rope is constantly bending and has some flexibility in it, but they really cannot be several kilometers apart from each other. They are all within few hundred meters. And I think if you think about the feature development or sprint, then this parallel is quite relevant. What each team member should feel is that he cannot lag too much behind, but also he cannot run ahead too much. And if he starts doing so, others immediately see that or feel that actually. And I think if we get that better, we actually get the time spent on one feature development significantly smaller. The daily stand-ups are related to that. We don't do currently daily stand-ups. As I understand, the main problem for the team members is that they all start their day at different time. So some people are early, some people like to sleep longer and then work longer. So thus, I think the main problem with the daily stand-up is that they haven't figured out a good time in a day where they could sync. Why I think that daily stand-ups might be very useful for the team is to get that alignment and sync each and every day within the team, whether we are progressing towards what we wanted to achieve in a week well enough. What they do today is that they just post their statuses into a Fleep chat, which is kind of good, but it doesn't create this moment every day to resync or realign the plans. So they rather just say what they are planning to do, but they are unable to react to the feedback from the others if they do it in different points in time. So if someone posts his plans in, say, 8 a.m., someone does it 11 a.m., then the guy who started his day in 8 a.m. has already work ongoing. So I hope they figure it out, and I clearly as a product owner don't have any say in it, but when I think about it, then seems that we should implement that as well. And the third thing I think we don't do a great job at all is product owner's role. Thankfully this is under my control to some extent, but I think what product owner should do, how much he should prepare the task and the spec, so to say. We do our specs in a bullet pointed view, we just pin it into Fleep, specific Fleep conversation as a requirement, and we change them, but quite often, first of all, the initial requirements when the work starts are quite generic, and if we change our plan during the development, I usually, or actually quite often, I don't update the spec or requirements. Also, I think what I don't do very well is we should have the UI design, I would say, in better shape when the development starts. Quite often it's kind of parallel right now. So development is already ongoing and designer is still working on how it will look like specifically. Then sprint planning, we don't do, as much as I know, within Scrum, actual sprint planning. What they do is all what happens in the weekly planning around meta backlog items. So basically they report what they have achieved and what they are planning to do with those work in progress meta backlog items. But I think what would be very useful for them is that they would actually, as a team, would think through in better details what within that week should happen and who should do what. I'm not sure whether we should do, I'm still unsure whether we should do any estimate planning, but maybe we will end up there as well someday. Currently, at least, we haven't thought about that at all. And the last thing is technology platforms ownership, and to some extent bugs as well. Once we have currently forcing the whole team towards focusing to the meta backlog items, to the new features, and making sure that if we start to work on a new feature, we finish that as quickly as possible, then this is good in the sense of creating new functionality into Fleep, but at the same time it creates a tension that old features out there where bugs arise, who has attention on them and how someone has still a time and focus to look into them, reproduce them and fix them. We have few thoughts on it. For example, we should have still a weekly web browser app or iPhone app backlog reviews. We don't do that today, so currently it's still kind of how it happens, and basically whether if it's a significant one, then hopefully someone fixes it quickly. But we don't have a good process around it. Neither we don't have a good process around platform-specific discussions and changes. So, for example, if we would like to, I don't know, theoretical example, if we would like to change our database engine, so we don't have any thoughts how this would fit into the current mode where we have the scrums and focus on the features. Maybe it should be a meta backlog item. I don't know. So those things are still to be figured out, and probably we are one day have some understanding of those as well. Currently, no. So I think this is it, what I had in my mind. I hope it was to some extent useful to you. I think the main takeaway or my advice is that whatever works for you, look for patterns, don't deal with the specific ones, and from thinking about my learnings from competing in a team as my hobby in sports, what I've learned is that the most important thing is that the team feels the shared goal. They all understand what has to be achieved. For example, that we all have to cycle for 100 kilometers, but the inevitability of us needing to finish all together. I think this is very important if you do cross-platform development or software as well, is that it doesn't help if we have a one feature working on iPhone if it doesn't work on Android or it doesn't work on browser. Then from end user perspective it's still unfinished. And this inevitability that you have to work with other people in the team is a great way to align people around the goal, and they start quite quickly supporting each other and finding a way how to move faster as a team, not as an individual. That's all I had to say. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. We have standard release procedure to release on Tuesday and Thursday morning at 10 AM Estonian time. If we cannot release at that point for whatever reason, then Marko or Asko just posts into the change management chat that the release is postponed, and usually up till how far. And secondly, if we, for example, release something on Thursday that messes up something, then we do hotfixes on Fridays as well, but this should be exception rather than standard. So usually we try to aim for Tuesdays and Thursdays. There are weeks where we do 5 releases as well, but we try to keep on 2. Apps is out of the cycle in that context that, first of all, the internal builds for iPhone and Android, they might happen several in one day. But we do a public releases if we have a certain set of features good enough in those apps that we are sure that we can push that out into the public. So I think the cycle with iPhone is more or less 1 month and Android more or less 3 weeks. And iPhone is worst in that case because it's on Android, when you push it into Google Play, then it's usually out there available for the end user within few hours. If you push it to the App Store, then it's in review from 4 days to 2 weeks in our case. And from the review, it might actually bounce back from whatever reason. We have had different awkward reasons why they are pushing back the code. So it might at the end to end, from the time when you wanted to submit until it's available for Renno, might easily be 3 weeks. Usually it's 1 week, but in worst cases it's longer. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, new features, we always think in what order we have to implement it in order to being able to release it as fast as possible. Usually it starts with the agreeing the API between the backend and the clients, because then both sides can start creating the development on both sides. So if Asko already proposes that, hey, this is how I want to do it on the API level, and if Erik, Andres and Oliver commits that, hey, this is fine, then both sides can actually start developing against it. Usually, Asko is able to think only in terms of code, so usually when he proposes something, he has already working API and working backend behind it. So this is the reality. With bugs, we have this great philosophy that shit bubbles up. That of course we report all the bugs, we try to fix them as fast as possible, but you really cannot spend the whole days and time making sure that all the bugs are prioritized. Usually we rather focus on making sure that ability to report a bug is super simple. For example, in case of ours, if I see a bug in web, all I have to do is open a web backlog chat, write my description as I see this bug there, and pin it onto pinboard, and it's done. So what should happen after that is that Andres or Jaak should pick it up and fix it, and then unpin it from the pinboard. Quite often what happens is that some bugs stay there for weeks. And this is my philosophy, that shit bubbles up, that if we keep coming to that bug, then the attention raises around it, and people just fix it. Yeah. Exactly, and this is usually the case, that if you follow how our features roll out, then we don't spend too much effort on releasing them at exactly the same point in time, but we rather try to optimize for them being released onto all those platforms during the next releases. So for example, I think what we did lately was the disclose feature, where you are able to tap on any message and say that from that point onwards, I want to disclose all the messages to Renno who I just added into Fleep conversation. This rolled out as a first thing onto browser, then with the next public release to Android, and I think Erik is currently finishing the development and will be available in the next iPhone release. So there might be a few weeks delay, but what we make sure is that if you roll out something to browser, it doesn't break the old iPhones or old Androids, but we don't keep the absolute feature parity throughout the releases. So we don't hold back the browser release, or we don't hold back the Android release because we don't have iPhone release ready yet. And at least up till now, no one has complained about that. So of course sometimes it's kind of confusing that I can't do that on iPhone yet, but then it's probably in the next release. We have active users currently, depending what is the cycle you mean, but the monthly users are 3,000, daily users are around 2,000 right now. we haven't done up till now any A/B testing at all. We've thought few times about it, but then we thought that, hey, why to spend all that time? Instead, let's just change it and measure it, and if needed, let's change again. And usually we think about A/B testing in terms of landing page, not in terms of product. In terms of product, what we rather do is we build an internal build, and we get already feedback from the internal we call them experimental users. There are our own team and some people outside of the team who can get access to the experimental features earlier, and then based on their feedback we might change some things. Sprints are both 1 week. Yeah. And yeah. Sorry? We have only Monday sprint planning, and this is the whole cycle throughout the company. Yeah. All right? Yeah.
If you're basically a startup, as I understand, why didn't you pick like Lean or Kanban? Why did you pick Scrum?
We didn't pick even Scrum. We just started building it, and we've understood more and more it looks like a Scrum to some extent. I think we still don't do Scrum because, and actually it's a very good point, because I actually wanted to start with that, is that you shouldn't, I think, pick a specific methodology and follow it as a religion. I think rather you should pick things and change things in your process if you see a pattern, something failing, and then you should look at, hey, how for example Scrum solves that. Okay, they have sprints. Okay, let's do sprints then as well. Or for example, estimate points in Scrum, I still don't understand whether they make sense to us. Maybe they do at some point, but in order to say that we actually do Scrum, we should use the whole thing, right? But we don't do that right now. So I think it's kind of evolutionary, and I think Scrum is very, very close to the natural way how you actually build things. Even if you think about, say you would have a task in a weekend to build a chair in your backyard, then how you usually do is very, very natural to Scrum actually. Maybe it's to some extent waterfall as well, I don't know. So do whatever works for you, and look for patterns. If something patterny, there is a pattern, something constantly failing week to week, month to month, then think why and what we can change there. For example, we had from quarter to quarter the situation where we had a great plans for the quarter, but only half of it got done, and there were many things which are work in progress status. So we thought that we don't really want that. We rather would like to have less things in work in progress and finish them quickly. And that's how we thought that, hey, let's push people into 2 separate teams, and let's try to take new things into development only once older things already in work have been completed. And this is we are working towards to. We agreed in the beginning of October that both teams take only 2 meta backlog items at the same time. We started with 5 and 5 actually, and we have now decreased to 3 and 2, as I said. All right, are we in time?
Great, yeah. We still have time for one more question.
Oh, excellent.
One last question. Anybody? Please, Tom.
What would you do next time?
You mean after Fleep? I want to go and cycle around the world. But I don't know. So if I would create a new startup, a new product, I don't know. Probably something similar, because we didn't very systematically plan. We had the previous experience that quarterly planning works for us, but everything else I think has been discovered to us throughout as we are developing, and as we are learning what went wrong and what could be actually being done better. I think so.
Great, thank you very much.
All right.
Big hand for Henn. Thank you very much, Henn.
Thank you.
It's great to get this feedback. Now, two more quick messages. I needed some vitamins, and lucky enough, Nortel has hundreds of those bottles down there. If you have a hangover like me from last night, that might be a solution how to get over it. Vita mineral water. It helps me a little bit. At 4:10 this afternoon, at the last break we have today, Playtech is doing the raffle for the goods they have. What is it? The drone they have for the game, and they have some other stuff. So if you participated there in those games with Playtech, please be at their booth at 4:10. Eventually, you will win something. Okay, time for coffee break. 20 minutes and actually 25 minutes. We are 5 minutes early, and then we're back in the rooms afterwards. 4 rooms again, same as yesterday. Thank you. Enjoy your coffee.